subject really close to my heart and something that I'm spending most of my time on at the moment. So I'm really looking forward to Emmie's talk and to the questions. So Emmie's talk is about 45 minutes. I've tried to get her to make it shorter, but she literally cannot make it any shorter. So we've agreed that I'm going to sort of hold it to that time. Then we'll have just a sort of 5 minute time to absorb it a little bit, and then a Q&A. So we were advertised to finish at 8. So if you have to leave at 8, that's absolutely fine, obviously. But we've got the hall until 8:30. So we'll have a little Q&A, and Emmie and I will both stay around afterwards anyway, if you want to stay and talk to us and other people to go. So it is my great pleasure to introduce Emmie as a fellow climate psychologist. And Emmie is a clinical psychologist who spent 20 years working in the NHS. And she retired early to focus on green issues and has in fact stood for Parliament and is a green councillor. And
not councillor.
Not councillor.
No, I'm not.
Oh,
no,
you said you were. You stood for it.
Yeah, I'll be a candidate for it. Yes.
Okay.
But I'm the chair.
Yeah. So chair of the West Northants Green Party, and runs your own village climate group as well.
Yeah.
And has sort of obviously spent time devoted to this topic of climate psychology. Yeah. So I'll hand over to you.
Hello, everybody. Yes, I'm Emmie Williamson. Previous specialism was psychosis and mental health. And today, climate psychology, which is quite a new field, and no one's really defined it. There is a Climate Psychology Alliance, of which Siobhan is on the board, and that part of it is kind of coming from psychoanalytic psychotherapy, some clinical psychologists. But the field could be as broad as you want, because there's all sorts of disciplines that are now exploring the questions I'm going to be showing you. From philosophy, culture studies, critical thinking, kind of academia. So I'm going to show you really a broad range of strands that I would lump under climate psychology. Okay, so the main 3 sections are the psychological roots of the climate crisis, the psychological responses, and the psychological approaches that can help us in our climate distress, but also in moving through to action when there can be blocks to that. So on this week, like probably the biggest week of climate denial, it's going to be part of my talk. Obviously, Trump has, taken us out of the Paris Agreement, and there is this very obvious climate denial within the massive movement of the right wing happening now. And it's come to our shores in the last week, you might have seen, with Nigel Farage and Liz Truss setting up a base for an international, but mainly US institute called the Heartlands Institute, which is basically a climate denial think tank. So it is quite scary how strong climate denial is and how it's spreading. It's not going away. I'm not sure that is, if you like, the ideological or political side of climate denial. What I'll be talking about today when I talk about denial is more how we've always seen it in psychoanalysis and psychotherapy as more of an unconscious process. And this is what's been exploited, really, because a bit like facing death, it's very, very hard to face this. So I'm going to be talking a bit about everyday climate denial that's everywhere, every person. So that's what's been exploited. And there's an interface between it with the right-wing media particularly dominating in power and vested interests. So I'll try and get that sort of systemic interaction with the personal, because of course psychologists, you think of us as just working with one person, but actually we are trained, certainly in clinical psychology, in systemic thinking and systemic family therapy, which applies to all sorts of levels and culture. So I'll talk a little bit about culture as well. I'll keep an eye out on the time. So the problem, this is the problem. 30 years of warnings. And you probably know this graph. We're actually, it says now 1.1. That shows this is only about 5 years old, this slope. It's 1.6, isn't it? It's going up like that. And, you know, most people now have seen the climate science, and the facts just aren't changing people's behavior. Yeah. Has anyone seen the film Don't Look Up?
Yeah.
Okay, yes. All right. Well, that bit, which is a bit blurred, but it says based on what could be possible real life, because it obviously is a thinly veiled comment on climate denial, if you like. So it's about a meteor coming to the planet, and people just don't want to face it. They want to carry on with their entertainment, and the scientists gradually go mad. And nobody could face the fact that they were all going to die. And really, it was an extremely good film because it had a lot of very clever aspects around psychology. So there's this aspect of climate silence. You've probably had this with people you know, because probably most of the people we know, you try to talk about the climate crisis, the catastrophes that are happening. You know, if we say the LA fires, and you say, well, obviously, this is another sign of the rapid burning of the earth. You know, people are going to, I had this at work as well. People just looked at me like I was crazy, and this silence would happen. Or you might get a sort of nod and a sort of, yeah, it's terrible, isn't it? And then there's this silence, isn't there? But notice what happens. Obviously, everyone here in this room is here because you're awake to it all. You're not in any type of soft denial, which I'll be talking about in a minute. And that's a very difficult place to be. And that's where a lot of people don't want to go. And so we know this also from the psychology around death. We're talking about death, and it sets off, you know, oh, I'm being morbid, aren't I? You know, the things close down if you try and talk about death. So climate silence is another, if you like, problem, but it's also a problem in the media. I mean, obviously, again, we're talking about mainly right-wing media, but even some of the mainstream left-wing media buries the climate stuff. You know, it's not okay to sort of accept when there's an obvious catastrophe, but then they don't, there might be a little flurry of articles, but it all dies down, and then soon you've got Prince Harry or whatever at the top, haven't you? It's a mystery, isn't it? It's quite a mystery about how in 30 years of the science being very, very clear, how it is that people, all of us, I mean, I was, you know, I know that in that 30 years, I would think some of them, but I just carried on with my life as normal. And I think those people like it. And at times, we probably do lose that reality. It's our minds and experience. So this is a climate psychologist who's sort of quite a key one in the climate psychology alliance. Our collective equanimity in the face of unprecedented risk posed by climate change is perhaps the greatest mystery of our age. Well, this is one of the areas that climate psychology is interested in. Is based, as I say, there's these other areas as well, the responses and the approaches. But we really need to think first about why there are these delays, if you like, in people changing. So definitions of climate psychology, slightly dry, but in any talk, I think it's a talk, I'm telling you about the field. A lot of people, like someone told me just tonight, didn't you realise this exists in the field? It's starting, it's been there for a little while, but it is new. And, you know, if at the end of this, you can't remember anything, you will remember that there's a climate psychology field in tools, okay? So definitions, a new way of understanding our collective paralysis in the face of worsening climate change. It's concerned with the emotions and the social and mental processes that have contributed to the ecological climate crisis and our responses and processes of adaptation to it. Very quite long read, but stay with me. It explores our anxiety and dependencies associated with the climate and ecological crisis. It considers forms of support and aims to help individuals and communities to cope and adapt. So it provides a psychosocial understanding. Psychosocial means individual to cultural and continuum, because as I said earlier, we're talking about individual. So a psychosocial understanding is the interaction. So a psychosocial understanding by exploring the interaction between personal and not. So these are the definitions. Psychological roots, how we got here. And we need to know really what it is and analyse. And basically, there's lots of books now. There's quite a few books about this, but there are different subfields, if you like. And one of them is evolutionary psychology. So the evolution of humans. And were we destined to overshoot our, if you like, what they call the carrying capacity of our ecological world? Some people would say, yes, we were destined to, because Homo sapiens, the type of human that we are, there were 8 types of human once. And they say that we probably cannot fit. So we're probably quite aggressive. Probably quite. All sorts of things, and our front brain is able to organize things and, you know, create things on the outside, more than just tools. But we also have this, which the apes don't have, the forebrain. And so we've made things more and more and more. We've exploited, we've extracted, and then we want more. And is that just, was that bound to happen with evolution? That's just one question. I've not been a great, I studied evolutionary theory actually, my first degree was zoology. I'm not a fan of how psychology has used evolution. It's too deterministic, it's too like, we're doomed because the humans are horrible from the planet. Well, actually, there are plenty of humans who haven't ruined this planet. There are plenty of humans, mainly indigenous, tribal communities that live perfectly well in steady state. Yeah, it's possible. So something's happened, and that's what I'm going to talk about as well. So then there's eco-psychology. You might have heard about this, but this is a field which really the main theory is that the problem started when we started to disconnect from nature. So if we think way back when humans, and some still do, and some want to, worship nature rather than an external god. So we would worship the sun, trees, and earth. Then we were connected with it, and there would be rituals around it, even if we were eating or using some aspects of our relations. Because indigenous people can often talk about the water or the forest being relations of things. They see them as family members, and it's a completely different way of seeing things. And in eco-psychology, really the thought is that it was when we started to see nature as out there, as separate from us, that things started to go wrong. And this is also why we've got mental health problems. I mean, it's many more reasons, but it's a really important one, isn't it? Because our society is pretty sick now, and there are huge amounts of mental health. We have psychology and therapy without connecting back with nature, finding ways to do that. So, but in terms of when we started to settle down and put out crops and have animals to raise in order to eat, then we're moving into the beginning of disconnecting and just seeing them as something to be used, if that makes sense. So that's the beginning of us seeing the world and nature as just for us to be used. Oh yeah, I just found this cartoon. The apple falls far from doesn't fall far from the tree is the saying. But in this cartoon, the tree throws it a long way away. But so we have moved a long way away, if you like, from the original tree. But we actually share a lot of cellular similarities. So I'll start a little bit with some of the theory. It might get a little bit dull at times, but I have to give you an overview of the field, all right? So basically, one of the first books, I mean, we could argue about when the field started, but Donna Orange's book, Climate Crisis, Psychoanalysis and Radical Ethics being about, she's really quite angry in this book about how we're ignoring social and climate injustice. You know, that in the north part of this globe, we are the ones who are polluting it, and the ones who are suffering are more in the south. That's just not fair. And she's saying until we radically come to terms with that, we're not going to change, because that is one of the worst aspects. But obviously, some people would say the worst aspects are trashing of nature, or whatever, but one way or the other, hers is very much about in the north part of the globe, we have this very compulsive consumption, conspicuous consumption, and social media has put a rocket up that, hasn't it? Comparing yourself. Have I got that? Should I have that? Oh, she looks good. I should look like that. I look all like frumpy and whatever. And so then you get like the shame aspect of not looking like other people do or whatever. And then there's envy, and that's all fueled, and advertising fuels it. So the whole thing is taken off. And our ignoring of climate injustice. And then the really important book, Sally Weintraub's Psychological Roots of the Climate Crisis, Neoliberal Exceptionalism and the Culture of Uncare. I'm just going to take that apart for a minute, because, you know, many people will know what neoliberalism means and many people won't. But it's basically that era of time, culturally and politically and economically, from the 80s, when Thatcher and Reagan really changed how everything is run. So mass privatization, sort of rocket booster to capitalism. That capitalism would solve everything, and that everyone become a consumer, and that we be regarded as consumers. And then you have power as a consumer. That was the idea. But what happened was it made you very individual. It made you only really thinking about yourself. And that's what they wanted. They wanted you mainly just to think, what do I need? What do I want? You know, and you compare yourself. And what goes with that is actually beginning to care less and less about other people, about the, if you like, what might be going on in the environment, because you're just thinking about what you need and success. And all these things that might have been always there were turbocharged in terms of neoliberalism, until we get to if you like, a mass personality that many people are very narcissistic. So it's just about me only. It's just about me. And we've culturally lost a lot of that default connection to community and each other. There's not just a disconnection from nature, it's a disconnection from people. And when we go to the extremes and the exceptionalism, which means I can do this, I can do this, I don't really care about what harm it's doing to anything. In fact, I just won't think about that because I need this and I need to do this because it's only me that matters. And I suppose if you're on the motorway and driving at 70 miles an hour and someone zooms past at 100 miles an hour, that's exceptionalism, isn't it? It's thinking that you matter more than anyone else. So that's just happening so much in general. So what Sally Weintraub says is this again is another turbo boost to the climate crisis, because with mass consumption, of course, and everybody throwing stuff away, and well, we know all this, don't we? That it's as far from a circular economy. They don't want it to be a circular economy. They don't want us repairing things and reusing things, because that wouldn't be fueling the profits and the power that's needed. And that's what's behind a lot of it. The other really interesting thing, I haven't rolled the book because it's really thick, but people might have heard about The Master and His Emissary, which is an amazing book, but it's really quite hard to read. But he's a psychiatrist and neuroscientist, but he's also studied a lot about culture. And basically, the left-hand side of your brain, now your brain is split into two. There's a left-hand side and a right-hand side, and there's a sort of channel between them. They should work together, basically. They're like two different personalities, and you might sometimes feel like you've got two different personalities, many people do. Because the right hand side is relational, emotional, it's big picture, it's kind of intuitive, and it doesn't speak, it's silent. So it really is all about the body, picking things up, all that kind of thing. The left is the opposite. It's about language, it's about concepts, it's about thinking about categories and what's real. And it's if you think about a table, it will be processed in your left hand side. If you think about your mum or something, it'll be processing in your right hand side. It's literally that different. And there are huge differences. It's got very narrow focus in the left hand side. It doesn't really care about relationships. It's just thinking about goals. It sort of goes with empirical science as well. We could think about sort of how science is very narrow and reduces things right down. And really, this is what's been happening in our culture as well. Science is a great thing, but it's almost gone too far. It's reduced everything down to this most analyzable thing. And we're losing this big picture of the system and Gaia, or the world. And we're losing this ability to see things in a big connected way. And this is also why we're losing our ability to see the risk coming down the road, because we're just looking like this. We're all just looking at we're looking at our phones now, aren't we? Kids 6.5 hours on a school day. So, we are really getting into bad trouble now. We're not looking at the risk. We can't see the risk. We're not thinking about the risk. So these are also other routes to the climate crisis. Finding that you might have heard of discourses. They're basically like arguments or narratives or stories. They're used in language. So in psychology, there's narrative therapy, there's narrative psychology, social constructionism. I won't sort of go into all this, but we see things as constructed. When people are looking at things in terms of, there's a lot of power in the media and what you read and what you hear, okay? So we'll see a lot of this in the media. These are discourses of climate delay that are really sort of used a lot by the fossil fuel interests and people like that, but also the right wing. But basically, they're becoming quite mainstream. Which is, what about China? We only have 1% of it. Have you heard that? I mean, God, it goes on and on. That one is such a common one. Why should we decarbonise? We're only tiny. We only do a few bits. Um, Non-transformative solutions, technological optimism. That is, oh, as long as we get green energy going, we'll be fine. But no, we're not. We need to change the whole of the way the culture and economy goes. And really, that's where we're at with the current government. Yeah, it's great that they're going down the route of, moving towards more and more green energy. Fantastic. But you know what? That extracts a hell of a lot of minerals, and we know that it sort of trashes a lot of environments. And actually, if you're going for growth, 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 like they are, you are going to trash a whole lot more. And there are going to be inevitably you need oil and stuff to actually make the wind turbines and so forth. No, we've got to rethink the whole of society, but no one's going to think like that, are they? And this is what climate psychology is about. It's like why obviously there's economic superorganism meta crisis kind of reasons that people aren't thinking like that. But in climate psychology, we also think people don't really want to have to think like that, don't want to change. We've got our comfort zones, haven't we? So surely there's a nice way of doing it. Can't we just have a gentle landing into change and, it'll just be easy? No, I'm afraid it's like you've got to actually have regulation and some government intervention, but it's looking a bit weak on that side. I won't go into each of these because time is going to run out. But the idea that change is impossible is another one. That if because the fossil fuel industry has failed basically in getting us to doubt the science, most people, I mean, they're going back to that, but they're now going down the route of encouraging doomism, which can be a good thing, doomsterism, deadaptation, but actually they kind of want that narrative because the adaptation narrative so that we don't decarbonize, that we don't try and do the mitigation bit. We need to do both, don't we? We know this, but there's ways that cause a delay. Another discourse, if you have a look at this cartoon, um, and I think some of us might have been made to feel like this as well. So what's happened, all the trees have been cut down here and they're pointing at the little distressed koala bear and saying, this young koala has a mental health problem. And really, it's so obvious, isn't it, why the koala is in distress. So really, what I'm saying is that it's normal to have distress. And what climate psychology is saying is that it's normal to be depressed, even distressed, find it overwhelming. Because people in this room are likely to have had that awakening where you're like, in the Don't Look Up film, you'd be like, oh my God, and then what do you feel? How can you cope with that? So let's talk about responses. Well, firstly, I'm going to talk about the types of responses that, if you like, delay it again. So cognitive biases. These are ways that people, if you like, don't really think something is going on. So conformity, for example, we all do what the next person does. All these social psychology experiments have shown this, that, you get, I don't know, in an experiment, they've actually put smoke coming under the door from outside. And there was a number of people with, and a few of them were actors, if you like. And then you've got the experimental subjects who don't realize the others are actors. And they kind of see it, but they think, well, no one else is running. So I won't run. And there's all sorts of dodgy conformity experiments about giving people electric shocks and things. But no, I think it was. But anyway, confirmatory bias. If you don't want to believe something, you're going to sort of gather evidence for your beliefs. So, for instance, say I didn't want to believe in climate, that, oh, yeah, I know that climate change is happening, but maybe it's not that bad. Oh, well, I'll just pick out the fact that we haven't really had any massive catastrophes, have we? It's not that bad, surely, and nature still seems to be there. And you could do all that kind of thing, gather your own evidence to support your own belief. And that's confirmatory bias. So that will be what a lot of people who are in soft denials will talk about. And I will try to speed up actually. Faulty alarm hypothesis is basically saying our brains aren't wired. So this book is really good. It's don't even think about it. It's called Why Our Brains Are Wired to Ignore Climate Change. And basically, a lot of it is about this idea that our smoke alarm is faulty. It's not picking up the risk. And that's because it's too big, it's too massive. It's like what some people call a hyper object. And it's too slow moving. So we're usually, our brains are wired for quick, sudden, in front of you, focused risks. You know, if you had, you know, a car coming towards you, you would quickly move, wouldn't you? But this is too sort of broad. And as I say, the right hand side of our brains has unfortunately been shut down. I could talk about shifting baselines, but I'd better get a move on. So I won't talk about just straightforward climate denial because we know that that's mainly political and for certain reasons and so forth. That is where somebody refuses to know, if you like, just doesn't want to take any notice of and maybe comes with nihilism, either cynicism, nihilism. Cynicism could be, oh yeah, I know the science, but I'm going to do it anyway. It's, you know, it's all load of rubbish, or those woo people doing these things, you know, very anti, that very aggressive, defensive kind of reaction that you can get. But I think one of the most interesting is soft denial, as the climate psychologists talk about, which in a broader terms is called disavowal, which has been used for many decades, really, in the literature in psychology. When you know something's the case, like someone's died, but you can't get your head around it. And in fact, you don't want to face it, maybe, or you don't want to face that someone's going to die or that you're going to die. And at some level, your unconscious just sort of pushes it away, and you can't sometimes overcome what the unconscious wants to do. Um, so this is what disavowal is. It actually is hard to overcome it. It can be conscious, of course, but diffusion, there are various ways that it does this sort of, oh, you know, well, it's not just me, or it's not just our country, it's the whole lot. Um, Not being curious, not reading those articles. I mean, I know a lot, you know, I struggle to do that with war, for example, or if I know that nature destruction, it can be really hard to read, can't it? But where the climate's concerned, people aren't looking at the science, you know, they're not seeking it out. And why is that? You know, why don't they say, I need to know more about this? Splitting. So that might be, oh, yes, I know that climate change is happening, but you're not actually, you're split off from the feelings. So you're not actually feeling it. And this could be intellectualizing too as well. It could be that you are looking at all the science, that you are sort of going to a lot of talks, but you've not actually faced the feelings. And that's a sort of dissociation. But it also protects you at some level from the gravity of what needs to happen. Um, or you sort of put it to one side, and I'll get to that another time. Wishful thinking, obviously, or maybe it will all be all right. I've actually heard people say that quite a bit. Doubt, oh, well, you know, the uncertainty of the science, but there isn't uncertainty really, but sort of doubting it can be real, knowing it's not a detachment and distancing. Routinization is just burying yourself in your current world and life, even though you know it's happening. So, so then we've got the responses of people, maybe like ourselves here, who really do know it's happening, who really have faced it's happening. Oh yeah, 10 minutes. Thank you. Yes. So you might recognize these feelings. Obviously, distress, guilt, grief, rage. I've certainly felt all of these myself. I haven't got time to go into all these, unfortunately, but activist burnout is a very key area as well that we need much more work in because we know that in this particular space, people with the passion and the feelings then get into, because basically what helps is to be active, is to do actions. It really does help, but people can almost get overwhelmed with that and well over out of balance. Paradigm distress is the fact that you might know that this is happening, but you can't change the way the world is around you. You can't change, your whole world is, if you like, tailored to driving or whatever it is, that using plastics and things like that. We can't change that enough. I will have to, the last one there, I would love to go into all of these really, but I always get this wrong with this talk. I always think I've cut loads out, but I've got to speed up now. But a shift in consciousness can happen, and that's what needs to happen. This is a curve about coming to terms with it, where you go down and then you can come up through meaning making, connection with others, and it's called a transition curve. But it's a pretty, and then there's a grief model. I haven't got time for this.
You've still got 10 minutes.
10 minutes?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Because
we didn't start till 10 past.
Yeah, well, that's very true. Yes, so I thank you. Well, and our colleague is Gareth Morgan, so I didn't want to miss this bit really. This is the general model called the power threat meaning framework, used a lot in clinical psychology, my profession, often for traumatized people, because these aspects are so important, both the power imbalances that may have caused the trauma and the threat responses. So threat responses can have many functions, and Gareth Morgan is somebody who has I won't really go into it now, but when there's a threat, you have a response, and there's a reason for that. In the climate crisis, there are definitely different types of responses because of trying to regulate your feelings, trying to maintain a sense of control, protection from dangers, and striving to place yourself in a social group. But these things can include minimizing, it can include the defenses, it can include intellectualizing, but it can also include taking action and trying to do stuff about it. But basically we think of what is the threat, what is the response, what is the meaning that we make of it, and what are the strengths that I've got. But it's a great model, but I haven't got time. I just kind of wanted to show you it. And then there are these organizations that are related to climate psychology. Climate Psychology Alliance, I've mentioned, Eco Psychology UK, XR Psychologists, which are some colleagues of mine, and the Climate Majority Project, I've added because Siobhan mentioned this, Climate Courage Campaign. And actually, the next column has also got some related things. So basically, in terms of approaches and support, you can get 3 free sessions with a CPA therapist. Now, the difference with a climate psychologist, if you need some help, is that they have been through the journey themselves. That big curve that I've just shown you, that will be what most people in this room will have been through and still go through. And it's what these therapists have been through. So many therapists won't have this awakening, and you'll be talking to someone who doesn't really get it. You might even get that climate silence, that's so uncomfortable. So you know that if you go to the CPA and get a free therapy sessions, that you will be talking to someone who's there with you. And ecotherapy, as I mentioned, is about therapists taking people out into forests and having sit spots and things like that where you can connect with nature. The Active Hope training online is a brilliant program. It's free. Just look up Active Hope training. I did the whole thing, but you can do as little or as much as you want, and as quickly or slowly. And there's bits to skip. But the idea is that you're blocked, that you know how bad it is, but you're blocked from actually doing much about it. Many of us aren't here. We're taking a lot of action. But for the average person, they need to unblock something. And to do that, they need to go into their pain, and then they see things with new eyes, and then they go forth and take action. So active hope training is really good, really good. It's got ecotherapy in there as well. Climate cafes, you will probably have heard about, but these come from mainly the CPA, which we know the main problem with eco distress is if you feel on your own, right? You need to join up because there's so many people who aren't in this place. You can feel isolated, so you have to join up with other people. And climate cafes are a place to talk about the feelings because there are a lot of talks, there's a lot of intellectual concepts, but let's talk about the feelings. Climate cafe. Radical hope. So that is, I know how bad it is. I know it's absolutely terrible. I'm not trying to do naive hope here. So radical hope is like radical acceptance. It's like I radically accept what's going to happen. And I'm going to join up with people anyway. And we're going to do this and we're going to do that. And it's not being suppressed. Perfect. So radical hope is a phrase that's really important. You need to find it. You'll have heard of deep adaptation, probably. Again, it's very similar to radical hope. The idea being really of sort of embracing doomster sort of identity. You know, people will say, "Oh, you don't want to be worrying about that. Don't be a doomer. You know, whatever." Well, it's kind of, well, if you're going to call me that, I'll be proud of it. I come out as a doomer. But Jen Bendell, who's written about this, talks about doomster, which sounds a bit more active. So it's saying, yes, you know, we are with the doom. And it's not humorous, but it's saying, this is real, and let's get some connections. There's a free Open University climate psychology course, which I've also done just to really see what, and there's great stuff. There's some of the stuff I've put here. This is another newish thing in a development goals framework. It's more like an organization, and they've got hubs, hundreds of hubs now internationally. Look at that. They've done all this research and they've come across this ways to have a real shift of consciousness that we need in people in order to change inner transformation of the inner in order to transform the outer. This is just a really nice little graphic about balance that we really need to find. And this is really important for some of us in this room. I've had to find this because we're doing action. Yes, that is what's going to help, right? If you're in eco-distress, this really, really helps. This also is really necessary. If you just have that, that's going to be burnout. You need the emotional engagement with it. Don't be driven by tasks and brain. You need the emotional stuff too. And then you need just time out, distancing from the whole thing without going into soft denial. So some distancing is very functional, it's very good. When you've got the balance between those three. This is a really good graphic. Window tolerance is really important because we're in a hyper-aroused culture and we can go dissociated. You've got to find the window in between. Climate cafes on the left. This little character is saying to everyone nice, happy things. And I'm a real people pleaser. So it's been really hard to sit at work and try and tell them how bad it's all going to be, you know, but actually that was how I was feeling on the right. So death cafes so there's a process to go through with a climate cafe for it to be a proper kind of climate cafe. It really has to focus on emotions, not actions, not science, not development. But I mean, you can talk about what's happening in the world, but we have to keep saying, well, how does that actually feel? And try to connect with those feelings. It's really not easy. It's not actually easy sometimes to connect with the feelings. You have to work on that. Oh, that's it. I cut things out. I took myself by surprise. I knew I took. So here we are. Over to you, Siobhan.
I mean, it's so much, isn't it? And I mean, both Emmie and I, we talked about this. We we're kind of used to this sort of language and this sort of talk because that's how, you know, we've been trained and how we sort of work for years and years. But even so, for us, it's overwhelming and there's so much still to learn and there's so much to discover about what is going on. Why are we in this situation? Why aren't people, you know, taking more action and talking about it and what have you? But I think the more you sort of looking at this and thinking about those cognitive biases and the denial and the disavowal, the other side of it is that it really helps you to kind of understand other people. So one of my worst things is trying to have conversations about climate, like Emmie said. And when people, you know, do that silence and just sort of start changing the subject and what have you, it's hard, isn't it, to talk about it. But I think doing this, learning about those aspects, really just help you to have a bit more compassion for people in your family or at work or friends that, you know, aren't really thinking about it, and maybe just sort of trying to meet them where they are and think about why are they, you know, like that. That's sort of, anyway, sorry, I'm going on now. My own personal reflections.
That's really important, though.
Yeah,
about understanding why people are.
Yeah, in that. Yeah. So this is for us as well, isn't it? To think about where we at, but it also helps us a lot, I think, in terms of thinking about other people and people that we talk to about it. I mean, my big thing now is this inner work, and that if you're not actually really going through that transition process and really thinking about it, experiencing it, feeling it yourself, you're not really able to sort of take action in a way that's going to help as much as you could if you really did go through that inner work process, the feeling. And yeah, and sometimes it's really horrible. You know, it is super depressing and super sort of frightening, actually. But going through it just give you that sort of energy and that sort of meaning to taking actions. And I think people are much more likely to be active and to become activists if they really do feel what the situation that we're in.
How do you make any drop in people's minds that climate change is a thing where they deny it? Do you have to relate to it on a personal level? Is that the best way?
One start.
Well, I think he's answered it himself.
Yes.
You've answered it, James. I personally think the personal level is really crucial, and I think it's that trying to understand where that person's coming from. I mean, we're not talking about the extreme ones here, like collarbone, or, you know, that was a tricky one to, you know, change his mind. But people who you know, in your everyday life that you feel are just shutting it out, I think for me, it's thinking about, well, why might they be shutting it out? And, you know, they might be shutting it out because they think it's overwhelming, and, you know, they want to sort of focus on their family and looking after their family, and they think that's all they can do, and nothing they will do makes any difference. So I think it's that connecting on a personal level for me and finding out more about them and more about why they might be thinking that. So, and I think any chance to sort of talk about anything that might be impacting them, where they sort of feel it, I think.
Yeah.
Let's see what Emily says.
Yeah, no, agreed. I mean, I think they know that it's happening, but for instance, with maybe frequent flying on holidays and so forth, and not, you know, maybe not wanting, again, that might be an example of when people kind of would rather not go there because they really would have to change how they live in many ways if you really went there, in terms of, and I would say it's very complicated to try to get somebody, no matter how intelligent they are or anything, to really get over this barrier? So that's why it's such a good question, because the without the media and the government being behind a whole load of messaging on this, it's very hard for us individually to start sort of changing people, because this is a deep thing. I think one thing this talk is saying is that this psychological barrier is everywhere. And until we've really got a bigger system that's, so for instance, there was a petition to the government, since they are saying that they're for net zero and everything, to have a public information strategy and program. You know, there used to be, didn't there, with, I don't know, safe sex, HIV, drugs, whatever, just say no, that kind of thing. Why can't they be showing just
It's the same with education,
yes,
isn't it?
we
And
need it in the
climate
early on.
education in
Yes.
schools,
Yeah.
which people
Definitely.
are also lobbying for, so that it is something that is more, it's easier to talk about, if you like.
But actually, I was heartbroken when the new government scrapped the natural history GCSE that had been worked on so long with Caroline Lucas and various others. It was going to come in. And I don't understand why they've scrapped it. Because one of the key things I can only think that they've been particularly captured by the corporate, rulers that are now running everything. Because surely to make people more aware of nature, but actually, isn't it cynical when I brought up cynicism? If they are thinking, oh, let's not let people get too sort of into nature, or they might start caring too much about, and stopping things happening. And they've just this week lifted a whole load of environmental regulations on planning and building. So it's looking in a bad direction. So when all this is happening, even with the Labour government, I think us trying to convince somebody when it's just not out there.
And now we've got Trump,
Yes, and those messages
he's
are getting
the
really powerful.
President of America.
Yes,
saying that.
exactly.
Please.
Yes. Yeah. I mean,
Let's see if there's another. Shall we see if there's another?
Anyone else have got a point? Yeah. Thank you.
Jen.
So you know how many advertising companies, and say if we take the food industry, they've got really good at making food kind of addictive.
Yeah.
And when you're distressed, telling you that it will make you feel emotionally better. Really good at that kind of marketing. Do you think there's any place for climate to use that kind of tactic? Like making car share schemes, like the thing that's going to get you a date, or
Yes, advertising. What? Yeah. Well, I think that's great. I think that speaks to what we've just been kind of saying. Yeah, actually, you're saying to beat them at their own game, and yeah, I guess government information, advertising. I mean, that's, I suppose, how I would kind of see a government public information campaign being, which they were a bit like adverts, weren't they, sometimes? But it would be really nice to, I think we do need a positive message. I'm really glad you mentioned this, because what we're finding is that negative messages, negative facts, if you think about what I've just said, can make it worse, because people switch off. So there needs to be a lot of carrot, if you like, a lot of, and positive messaging, emotional messaging. So you're right, a kind of
it goes a little bit with the conformity thing
Yes.
as well, and whether it's a sort of okay thing to do, doesn't it?
Yes.
So if it's seen to be okay to, which I guess we're getting somewhere with, people being a little bit greener, but there's still a lot of, like the holiday adverts and all of that. It's still seen as absolutely fine to fly wherever you like, isn't it? And if it was seen as cool to go by the train, or then that would be, you wouldn't feel different. You wouldn't feel. So it's sort of back to that psychology of it.
But yeah, the messages are all wrong out there, aren't they? No one questioning it.
Yeah, that one.
Now they've got a couple, there's another.
So it brings up perhaps another need in terms of psychology as to how we do it. As we talked about how you persuade people who are in soft denial to either stop flying or whatever, or to become active, which is perhaps even more important than stopping the way they live necessarily. But as you perhaps it seems a good way to say that. We need the governments to be setting the agenda, don't we, in a way, to be saying it's not good to do, and how can we persuade people? So they're the people we need to be persuading, isn't it? Our governments and businesses to be doing the right thing, and then hopefully people will get the message along more easily. So the psychology needed really is how we persuade governments and business.
Yes, I'll come back to that. We've got time. And there was someone who,
I
Yeah.
just think we need to stop consuming so much. You know, with the internet, it's so easy to just order what you like, you know, in the hope that makes you happy. And I was absolutely shocked when you see all the Christmas toys, all the plastic rubbish, all the little pieces, then special offers instead of £60, this castle is only £25.
yeah,
But you know, I think we need to make it trendy to go second hand.
Yes.
You know, having toy libraries, you don't need to buy all this plastic rubbish. And share with maybe the community can in the street you can share your toys or books or whatever.
agreed. And there are trends, aren't there?
Yeah,
So
you
yes,
need to
we'll
make
have one
it-
more.
Make it, you're cool when you do that.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
I was hoping I'd going to come tonight and you're going to tell me the answer, which is a bit of a bummer. But
Have we
Would
told
you-
you any answers?
one of the things you said though was about how it made me liken it to smoking,
Yeah.
Yes.
because I'm a big fan of Alan Carr. I don't know if anyone else has read his book, but he does and shows you all the brainwashing over the years, the lies, the fact that the only thing you get when you have a cigarette is the poison in your body. There's absolutely no benefit from it, except for being a smoker all my life. And I still say that and not completely believe it. I did think I needed it. I did think it did this for me. I did think it made me more sociable. I did think it helped me in all these things. And then we're finally winning that battle, and the buggers come out with vapes.
Yes.
And absolutely, my daughter said to me the other day that all but one of her friends vape. And so it's actually worse than it was with smoking. I've actually said to my God, you smoke, so at least it takes you 20 years to get cancer rather than a few years and you'll be getting popcorn. Then anyway, I go off, but it's just a bit depressing. It's like we've got big money against us.
Yes.
Big money against us. I assume that a lot of them are the sort of people that think it won't matter, I'll be dead. How do we get past that? How do we get past that? Or what do we do about the thought of, like you say, narcissism?
Yeah.
The selfish thing is actually maybe they don't believe in afterlife. I don't, but maybe they don't believe in anything like that. All they're thinking is, I'm all right, might not even have kids. I'm all right. And yeah, sorry, that's so depressing. But what's the answer?
It is. Yeah. It is, unfortunately. That's why we talked about radical hope. I think it's a really important points about the corporations, if you like. Apparently, the guy who runs one of those organisations, which was the Inner Development Goals framework, is working a lot with corporations and saying that actually he's getting a long way because they've got techniques and then going in and then really getting some top CEOs to change. But I would tend more towards the more sort of less hope on that one, really. And we are talking about, you might have heard that phrase about the superorganism, that late capitalism is now so, and I'm glad you raised about food that's damaging everyone, this hyper processed food, ultra processed food that's addictive. And, you know, in the States, there's such high diabetes, isn't there? And then the pharmaceutical companies are doing really well out there. You could almost say, and it's not really being too conspiratorial, to say, hang on, isn't this amazing? But by people getting ill, a lot of people are getting rich. And actually, the world, when I talked about the culture of uncare, that's exactly what Sally Weintraub is saying, is that they're not caring. The well-being, you know, economies are run for growth, and the growth goes to the profits. It doesn't go, well, I won't get into a political conversation, but we do know, but we also can get hope from movements. And there's a great video, if you look up a video on YouTube called How to Start a Movement, I think it is, very funny video of one guy in a festival starting to dance in a really silly way, and then a couple more join him, and then huge crowds join him. But at the beginning, he looks absolutely ridiculous on his own. And we are making networks, we are making movements, and we might split off. We might have a splitting off or something where the corporates thing, I mean, obviously we haven't got the power, but it will, you know, inevitably it's all unsustainable, and we know that. And this is partly what this talk is about, is saying, hang on, you can't have eternal growth. So what's going to happen? And this great big runaway train is nowhere near stopping, is it? So it's running over people, it's running over the planet.
I'm just thinking about the Great Turning.
Oh, yes, yes,
Which,
yes, in the active hope.
in Active Hope, which is, you know, big influence on this sort of area, which is a brilliant, as I don't know if you picked that up, Emmie said, that Active Hope course is online and it's completely free, and it's got videos, and you can do it when you want, and, you know, whatever. But it does kind of help to, a lot of people talk about triggers these days, don't they? Triggers for things that, you know, and all this, the news and what's going on and things the government are doing and what have you. They're triggers for us to be, you know, get really depressed and worried and anxious. But there's a lot of glimmers as well of things that people are doing that are very different.
Yeah.
Very, you know, rejecting all of that sort of way of living. And there is an idea that this is all leading somewhere, and it's leading to the Great Turning, where we're all going to, you know, think about living differently and think about looking towards the global south, looking towards indigenous cultures that, you know, are living well and are, you know, I mean, we're a sick society, as Emmie said. So many people are unhappy. Maybe people will start thinking about things differently. So, and slight answer to Alan's question, which he probably knows I'm going to say. But yes, there is government and there is activism, which is a hugely important area, I think. But there's also community and change at our community level and with our friends, with our families, in our street, in our groups, and all the sort of level of community activism and repair cafe and you know, grow, cook, eat, and all the things that I know loads of you are sort of already doing. So there's an idea as well that that not only sort of gives us meaning and sort of helps us together to have the answer and to sort of feel that we, you know, we can cope and we can sort of do something, and gives us that meaning. But it also, you know, maybe changes bottom up as well as top down, and, you know, politically as well. I think it's got a lot of a lot going for it.
one of the things that I constantly struggle with is the data. Because, as you said right at the beginning, things are looking pretty dire in terms of our future. And we can't run away from that. But at the same time, we also have to offer hope. I have little hope now in terms
That's fair enough.
based on where we are at now,
Yeah.
the nature of our society now. I have a little hope that things will change, but I do have hope that we need to think and imagine a different kind of society beyond what capitalism effectively offers now. And I'm encouraged by the growing movement around the ideas of eco-socialism that are developing. And there's a friend of mine, Alan Todd, who's an environmental activist in Manchester and Cumbria, who's been very active in the campaign against new coal mines there, which eventually resulted in them overturning a planning application for a new coal mine. And Alan Todd's just written a new book, and he just sent me the details of it today, which is going to be published in March. It's called For the Earth to Live, The Case for Eco-Socialism. And he's also going to come and speak to us on Zoom in March. You may be interested in. It's going to be a Zoom event. And there's also the foreword to the book is by Julia, some people will know her, Julia Nyberg, a professor, Julia Nyberg, and she's also going to join us. She wrote the introduction to the book. So people, if anyone's interested, just come and have a word with me afterwards, and I can give you details of when that Zoom meeting will take place. But I do think we need to envision a new society, and all the good that people are doing, however good it may be, recycling, actually, in reality, it may help to change people's ideas and to involve people in that. But ultimately, that's not enough to prevent the disaster that's occurring. And we need a new kind of need to also give people the hope that things can change in a really positive direction. I don't know if that helps, but thank you.
Do we want to close here, numbers?
Yeah.
I know people have kind of stayed around.
I mean,
long.
it's nice to close on that in a way,
Yeah.
because I think what you're talking about is going back to having a caring, because equality and sharing and so forth and community is really what we're moving towards. And books like the Donut Economics and so forth, it's all about deeply caring again. And that's what we are bringing back. And in the Active Hope training, he's got diagrams of how, lots and lots of people can
You
begin
cut
to
out
build.
that diagram, didn't you? That was a shame. You cut that
Yes,
out.
yes, that's right. And we need
Yeah.
you do multiply, and there have been movements that have multiplied and become really quite a force to contend with. But still, I do think you mentioned about making things trendy, and actually they already are in many circles, that there are really good movements already happening around circular economy type, eco-socialism even. It might well be that there are some kind of geographical separations that start to happen, so yeah, we better finish.
On your point as well, can I just sort of say that I think those sorts of things like imagining, envisioning a different future, they're happening because people are realizing there's very little hope. So, and back to your point, Leanne, about how depressing everything is, it's almost like, well, have we got to sort of realize? And I mean, a lot of people these days talking about collapse and the meta crisis, and that it's not just climate. And have we got to kind of almost come to that awakening in order to really start imagining something different? And like you said about green energy and stuff like that, have we got to really think more deeply and more about how we're living, rather than trying to find ways to carry on living the way we are.
Yeah. And you know, just talking about hope, this book is called Holding the Hope, which is mainly for psychotherapists, psychologists working climate psychology, that you know there's something about holding the hope for each other. But this is, you know, where radical hope comes in, and that phrase is about how you find hope at times where you're also accepting that this is really extremely dire. So not just staying in that deep part of the curve, but somehow finding that radical hope, which is completely, it's very transformational of people to move from that to that. So thank you. I think we've had
Well, I think just to say, just one more thing was whether anybody would be interested in any sort of more talks around psychology, or maybe even about talking to children and young people about climate, things like that, in that sort of, you know, in this area, and whether or not we could have a climate cafe, which I know we're in
yes.
and
Well, also we do in Climate Action West Northants. If you look up online, I help run one of them there. So Corn is a Corn Exchange, so that's CA-WN, runs monthly climate cafes online. Tiny groups sometimes, it varies, and we get people internationally. So every conversation is very different. So I can't promise what it'd be like, but I'm usually there helping people to just talk about this like we are here.
and all the Climate Psychology Alliance stuff is free, it's online. There are groups for young people as well, to talk about, you know, their feelings and explore how they, you know, are processing things and what actions they might want to take. And as you said, 3 free therapy sessions for whenever you're feeling very sort of overwhelmed or down about it. So
Okay.
big round of applause for everyone.